Hello, I am Park Se-jun, the CEO of ChainLight. The topic of my presentation changed a little bit. It is titled Embracing a Culture of Continuous Security, so I'm going to talk about continuous security and its importance today. It's not too different from the previous topic, but I'm going to talk more about the technical aspects. I'm given 20 minutes, which is a very short time, so I won't be able to deep dive into many details, but explain why the current security approach is not enough and how we can create a better security system. Before we start talking about security, I will first talk about what we have done in terms of blockchain and Web3. The blockchain industry has grown incredibly fast, and along the way, we've seen both groundbreaking innovations and some serious security issues. Director Jung Jae-yong just explained that in detail earlier. These security problems have been persistent ever since the beginning. So let's take a look at a timeline of key events that have shaped the way we approach security today. Back in the early days of Web3, you might remember, there were a lot of vulnerabilities in blockchains, which are well known now, but we didn't know about them back then. So there was a lack of awareness of the importance of security, and because of that, a lot of times you'd get a lot of assets stolen at once. One major example is the infamous DAO hack in 2016. It happened so long ago that you might not remember the details, but it was more than just a technical vulnerability attack, but was a quite historic incident, especially for Ethereum, because it exploited something that's now so well known and rarely happens through a re-entrancy attack. About $60 million worth of Ethereum was taken, resulting in hard forks splitting Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. It really made the whole industry to rethink about how the security of smart contracts. And in terms of node security, it raised awareness about vulnerabilities. And what was interesting about this incident was that it wasn't just a typical security breach. Even though the smart contracts code and the node implementations code was followed, there was still a bug which was exploited by the attacker. Bitfinex's hack is another example, though the attack was a bit different in nature. A hacker named Ilya Lichtenstein hacked into the internal systems of the exchange and stole about 120,000 bitcoins, causing the price of Bitcoin to plummet like 20% instantly. It's really hard to imagine that in today's bullish market. But the interesting thing about this case is that he tried to launder about $4.5 billion of that, and that's how he ended up getting caught. There's a big lesson in this case. Most people focus on the staggering number, 120,000 BTC, but the real takeaway here was about the custody architecture. After the Mt. Gox incident, we adopted multi-signature wallets, but even with these best practices in place, this hack still happened. So it's not just about implementing these concepts, it's about implementing them properly and continuously monitoring them. And coincidentally, tomorrow and the day after are the sentencing dates for the couple involved in this case. So we'll soon find out about their fate. Web3 saw explosive growth starting around 2020, and by early 2022, the DeFi ecosystem surpassed $84 billion in value. And now the market picked up again, and it's about $110 billion, or about 154 trillion Korean won at today's exchange rate, which is huge, just DeFi alone. With all this capital flowing in, we're seeing the emergence of many decentralized applications. As you can see, this is the ecosystem map by sector, and it only represents a fraction of what's out there. You can see that there's been a lot of change. In the early days, we were more focused on financial applications. Now we're expanding into AI, gaming, identity management, insurance, and countless other areas. However, such rapid growth is creating new security challenges. Especially, more and more interactions between protocols are creating new attack pathways and vectors that we could not imagine a few years ago. But even though these security incidents keep happening, the security awareness and legislation has not really kept pace with the growth of Web3. That was the reality. Take, for example, a hacker who claimed to be a white hat. The white hat stole about 7.8 million euros worth of cryptocurrency. The case happened in France, and the hacker said, "I'm just a good guy showing you where your weaknesses are." But the funds were already stolen. And when this case was brought to the court, the hacker was acquitted, which sparked a lot of controversy. If this case happened today, the hacker would be in prison. But at the time, the legal system was not equipped to handle security breaches in the Web3 space. I'm sure all of you remember the FTX collapse. This massive incident made governments around the world to realize that this is not just a little incident here and there, but this is something that can actually really hurt people. And that is why they felt the need to regulate. It wasn't a direct hacking incident, but it's what led governments and regulatory organizations to get more involved. So regulators are trying to catch up and trying to understand and trying to lead the way, but there's still a bit of gap between the pace of innovation and the regulatory protection. If we look at the current status, not just the government, but every player within the Web3 ecosystem realizes the need of security. So it's in a positive state. As the industry matures, the approach to security is changing greatly as well. As the security awareness within the Web3 community grows, the law enforcement's capabilities to track and prevent attacks have also improved. In the previous sessions, we've learned about the tracking technologies and its advancements. More knowledge and know-hows are improving such technologies. So now we're not just reacting to incidents. When they happen, we're moving towards proactive security measures. For example, in Web3, there is a security alliance called SEAL. A group of Web3 security researchers, including us, got together and created this alliance. In the US, A16C Crypto or Paradigm VC, as well as other VCs who really need to protect this ecosystem, formed this alliance. And this alliance offers preemptive testing to prevent security incidents and rapid information sharing in the event of breaches, and even offer training to strengthen preparedness. This shows how mature the community has become. We're no longer waiting for the governments to step in, but rather recognize the need for action and are taking real steps, which are good signs. Legally, at the moment, decisions are now being made much faster than before. For example, recently, a project called Z Casino fled after carrying a rug pull of Ethereum. It was a casino product using zero knowledge. But within 2 weeks of the rug pull attempt, the perpetrators were arrested by the Dutch police. Before, crypto-related crime investigations took months and years. And compared to that, this was a great improvement. So now, as we look at the threats that Web3 faces, I'm going to emphasize the importance of security once again. I'm pretty sure you've all heard the phrase Wild West. It's a very befitting phrase when it comes to security. There are state-led attacks, or sophisticated attacks, or ransomware gangs, and a whole range of attacks that take advantage of vulnerabilities. And just like the Wild West, in this specific space, there are perpetrators and there are sheriffs who are trying to fight off these perpetrators. These modern digital sheriffs don't fight with guns, but they have blockchain analytics skills and smart contract security knowledge as their weapons. If you look at the recent headlines, you can see the trends of the current threats. I'm sure you've heard a lot of the well-known cases, so I'm going to focus more on how the trend is changing. And it's actually positive news. There are these white hackers who claim to be white hat, and they'll steal, and they say, hey, give us 10%, we'll give it back to you. They claim to be the good guys, when in fact they're taking the money and say, hey, if you don't give us 10% of this, we might not give it back to you. And it's almost like blackmail. In the past, these people who used to just take the money and run are now starting to return it, and rewards are provided to them to appease them. So we're seeing slight changes in the ecosystems, which means that the attackers are realizing it's actually more worthwhile to work together with the ecosystem rather to fight them in the long run. Eigenlayer case is also quite interesting too. It did not have to do with technical vulnerability. This was a sophisticated attack involving social engineering techniques like stealing hot wallets and private keys. The key takeaway from cases like this is that attacks are becoming increasingly targeted and strategic. So, why is security so important in Web3? Of course, there's the financial aspect. We want to protect investors from monetary losses, but the big picture here is that it's linked to national security, global order, and public safety. And that is because North Korea hacks Web3 projects and they're very active and sophisticated. And also, they are very skilled. And they do it very diligently. And they do it until the hack is successful. But the bigger problem here is that we're clearly making it a little bit too easy for them to attack. So if you just look at this graph from 2017 until today, the amount of cryptocurrency theft by these North Korean hackers continue to grow. Especially in recent years, it has skyrocketed and amounts to billions of dollars a year. So in a sense, the past couple of years, we saw North Korea conducting missile tests and launching missiles. The costs for these programs are huge, that they manage to fund them thanks to the resources they have stolen from these hacks. And these things matter in the Web3 ecosystem. If it becomes to be seen as merely a funding source for Kim Jong-un's military buildup, it would severely damage the credibility in Web3. So we need to stop that and block funds from flowing into North Korea. Only then will people believe that this ecosystem has matured and can build something within it. So, in this regard, I'd like to address one of the biggest misconceptions in the industry, security audits. Our team, ChainLight, conducts many security audits. Why I say misconception is because we're also cautious. When someone asks, does an audit mean everything is secure? We can't dare to say yes. Many projects proudly claim they've been audited by the best security firms in the industry. But what you see here is just one example. This protocol case is a lesson for us because it's been audited by company O, company H, company C, the best firms in the industry. They've been audited numerous times. They even conducted ZK-related audits and hosted a competitive audit called Sherlock, which is a bug bounty competition. To ensure there were no vulnerabilities, it looked airtight, but they ended up getting hacked for about $200 million. There are a couple of reasons why security audits fail. The first is the limitation of timing. When we conduct an audit, we freeze the code at that point in time, and we're only checking the code at that particular point in time. So it's vulnerable to post-audit changes or new attack techniques. This means that audits need to be repeated every time there are changes, and even then, there's the issue of scope. Audits are constrained by financials, time, and resource limitations, so audit teams can't realistically account for every single scenario or examine everything. And then there are interactions between protocols, which are difficult to identify in advance. Additionally, even the most skilled white hat hackers or auditors can make mistakes because they're human. And while we do our job, there are attackers who are endlessly innovating, researching, and testing new strategies. So you need to keep that in mind. The biggest problem, however, here is the fact that audit can give you a false sense of security. It is very dangerous to think that because we're audited, we're safe. We're not going to get into any trouble. So that brings us to the real topic of today, why we need a continuous and comprehensive approach to security. I was very ambitious. I prepared a lot of slides, but because we don't have much time, I'll try to be quick. So this slide is the same. It shows you why audit failed for several reasons. I'll skip through the slide though. But here again, issues with prior keys, deployment configuration errors, new features added, not having that audit again, all of those things happened. And there were things that the auditor missed. But so do we. We're humans, so we can miss things. That's why we have to look at this audit as not just an item or an action, but as a whole process. So that is why I want to introduce to you the secure SDLC strategy. If you're in this industry or if you're doing things related to security or software development, I'm pretty sure you know this SDLC. It's the software development lifecycle. It is the traditional life cycle of software development, and this is a diagram of SDLC. It goes in the counterclockwise direction. It's a cyclical process that you use when you plan or create a product or project. So first you plan it, then design it and develop it, test it, document it, deploy it, and then continuously monitor it and operate it. And during your operation, you might come up with a new plan, continuing this cycle. But there is something special about Web3. What is it? It's our strength, where we try to break the current paradigm and pursue innovation. And thanks to that spirit of challenge, we've been able to come up with a lot of really new services like DeFi, NFT, and DAO. But we need a balance here. For sure, it's great to try new things, but we also have 50 years worth of experience and best practices of software engineering, and the products that we make are built on top of softwares. So it wouldn't be wise to ignore these experiences and know-hows. All of these processes is still valid in the Web3 ecosystem, so security must be considered at every step of the process. So let's look at each step and talk about what should be reinforced in terms of security. So in SDLC's first phase or planning phase, this is how you should approach security. First, you need to identify the attack surface. What's exposed? Is our smart contract or front-end UI or back-end API exposed? Because each of these elements have its own security risk factors. Next, we need to identify who the potential attackers are, such as who is targeting us, who wants to attack us. And based on that, we have to make a strategy. And then you need to look into the techniques used by these attackers. You need to conduct a proper risk assessment in the planning stage to create an effective security strategy. So I prepared 8 things. I've shared 2 so far, so I'll try to be quick. Let's move on to the design phase. In the design phase, you tend to think, let's build it first and then think about security later, but that's dangerous and too late because by then you might have to completely change the design. So security matters while you design, and there are 2 things to keep in mind. First, especially in Web3, the actual technical security architecture matters, and next is the governance framework. For security, role-based access control needs to be checked. Financial model safety and circuit breakers for emergencies need to be checked. And then there is separation of rights, multi-sig, and all other security policies that need to be considered. For governance, upgradability, the emergency pause function, and the change in configurations, the implementation steps and voting process should be considered. But then there is a trade-off here. If the governance is too flexible and it's easy to upgrade, then that can lead to malicious governance attack that installs backdoor code or something like that. So it's really important to get that balance right. If you put in a lot of time and effort in the design phase, that's actually more efficient than having to redesign everything after an audit. Next, for the development phase, I will begin with a very famous quote by Tony Hoare. There are 2 ways of constructing a software design. One way is to make it simple so that there are obviously no deficiencies, meaning you can't make complex programs. And the other way is to make it so complicated that there are no obvious deficiencies. There are only 2 ways. If we're somewhere in between, deficiencies are bound to be there, and we need to have a strategy to address them. Therefore, the biggest thing here is to keep it simple. Just develop what you need. Complicated or unnecessary code often gets back to you without having you realize that it's there. So if it's no longer needed, delete them. Secondly, code defensively. Account for all possible exceptions. I guess people will only put in valid values. Don't assume this. Instead, consider scenarios where someone with malicious intent tries to attack the system. Continuous testing is also important. As we rush through development, we kind of neglect testing. You say you'll do it later and the test code is always empty. If a test fails, the right thing to do is to fix the code, but most times you just footnote it and skip through it, which eventually leads to incidents. Then there is code reviews. It's for sure a necessity, but most think it as optional. A code written by one person is most likely to have errors, and even if you review your own code, it tends to look safe and okay. So you need others with different views and experiences to review your code. If you follow these steps faithfully, you have a protocol design that reflects security features and testing, but it isn't flawless. You need to test it. Security verification needs to occur on 3 levels. The most basic level will be audits conducted by external security experts. If you thought about security since the design phase, there shouldn't be any critical issues at this step. However, if there are problems, they need to be turned into test cases so that we can continuously test them. The second level is something called competitive audit, which is unique to Web3. It's not just one company, but there's a bounty prompting several companies to audit your product. So you're leveraging the eyes of different experts with different backgrounds and experiences. The last one is bug bounty. You ask hackers, don't attack us, find a bug, report it, and we'll reward you for it. This program runs continuously. So you need this multi-layered approach because each of these layers will help you find different kinds of vulnerabilities. It's like having multiple layers of safety nets. So once you have the protocol, it's time to think about operations, starting with documentation. It's easy to put off, but there are 2 things that you must document. First is code and API documentation so that if developers want to develop further or scale up, they can use that document. The second is more important, which is security procedures. No matter how perfect the code is, you need to know how to deploy it, how to configure it, and who has the administrative keys, and how and when these keys can be used, and how to stop the protocol when there is a problem, or what the action items and the playbook is when there is a hack. All these things must be prepared in advance. And then the deployment phase is the most important. Even if you have developed everything perfectly, the real impact comes after deployment. Once deployed, there is nothing you can do about it. You have to make sure that there's no mistakes during the deployment. Nomad or YEarn, they made great products, but their mistakes and misconfigurations during deployment resulted in enormous losses amounting to $200 million, $10 million. So during deployment, 3 things are key. First is checking deployment configuration thoroughly. Second is admin accounts and multi-sig settings. And last is immediate removal of unnecessary permissions. It's almost time. So the last one is monitoring. And monitoring is something that we should always be doing, because when an attack occurs, time is of the essence. If you detect an anomaly earlier on and respond to it quickly, you can prevent the significant damage. So monitoring is something we must do. The same goes for operations, bug fixes, contract upgrades, admin key management, governance voting. All of this must work together seamlessly to have a safe and secure system. So in short, you need to have a multi-layered security approach. A single audit or a test code pop-up is not the end. So I hope you reinforce your security with this multi-layered security approach. Finally, there's one last thing I want to emphasize before I go. The core of security is people. People build products, people run operations. So people are in this picture, and we actually make this for people. That is why we and Dunamu were looking to foster talent who will lead the future of the Web3 security. What we do and why we do it, Tommy already gave a great explanation, so I won't go into too much detail, but I will say this. The sustainable future of security ultimately lies in the hands of smart and new talents. We hope you'll take interest, refer people, or apply to the Academy yourself so we can create a safe Web3 future together. After this session, the first class of our Academy graduates are going to share their research results. So please stay with us until the very end. So this is the summary slide. Since I've talked about it, I'm not going to read it, but Web3 security is all of our responsibility, so please join us in this effort. This wraps my presentation. Thank you.